Welcome to this lecture on Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, Boston Lyric Opera's final production of the season. My name is Allison Voth. I am the principal coach at Boston University's Opera Institute. It is my pleasure to be with you here today to talk about Carousel, its origins, and its music. Some of you may ask why an opera company would include a musical in its season, but when you think of the origins of Broadway, it makes total sense. Broadway developed out of the European operatic forms such as German and Austrian Singspiel, think Mozart, French operetta, think Offenbach, British operetta, think Gilbert and Sullivan, Yiddish theater, vaudeville, and even burlesque. All of these operatic music theater forms influenced and played a role in the development of Broadway as we know it, or as we like to refer to it here at Boston Lyric Opera, music theater. In the late 1900s, a decided influence on the Broadway musical was the British musical comedy, musical farce, or musical play, as they were referred to. They were all the rage. These works, unlike vaudeville, had concrete dramatic through lines, albeit of a lighter nature, usually about a young woman. Their obsession with young girls and their life journeys is evident in common titles of the time: the shop girl, gaiety girl, the runaway girl, and the geisha. We can certainly see the influence of a young woman's journey in Carousel. However, unlike the early forms of entertainment, Carousel was not your average feel-good girl meets her knight in shining armor journey. Not at all. This journey, as many of you know, includes domestic violence, suicide, and a return of the dead. One might ask, how could a music theater work that includes socially taboo subject matter and a doomed relationship possibly be successful? There are many reasons. A brilliant score by Richard Rodgers, an equally brilliant book by Rodgers Hammerstein, to be sure, contributed to its success. But perhaps more so, it was due to their bold attempt to look the realities of rural America square in the face and to bring taboo subjects to the surface of American dialogue and awareness through the accessible means of music theater. Rodgers and Hammerstein dared to step outside of the fun-filled, sentimental, feel-good box of most American musicals, hoping that audiences were ready for something edgier. They took a chance and pulled the veil off of quaint rural America where everyone was assumed to be happy, understanding, and trouble-free. They exposed the flawed characters who exist everywhere in America, especially in an America weary and unhinged from the ill effects and personal losses of World War II, including returning soldiers with shell shock and what we now refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder. Rodgers and Hammerstein assured Americans that they were not alone in their troubles wherever they lived. In short, Carousel's tale of woe resonated with all of America. So, how did Carousel come to be written? Well, in the early 40s, Rodgers' 20-year-long successful but troubled collaboration with Lawrence Hart was starting to unravel. It was fraught due to Hart's ongoing mental instability and severe alcoholism. Rodgers approached Hammerstein to ask him to be his new lyricist. Hammerstein declined and instead encouraged him to stick with Hart, but promised he would be in the wings if things truly came to an end. They did, and Hammerstein soon became Rodgers' new main collaborator. Their collaboration had its stresses as well, but it was more a matter of work style than personal conflict. Rodgers was used to a certain collaborative rhythm with Hart, but Hammerstein needed more time to write and rewrite, unlike Rodgers, who could spin out a tune in minutes after being handed a text. Despite their disparate processes, they soon became a brilliant team. Their first full production was Oklahoma in 1943, which was an overnight sensation. Rodgers was already on the map, but Oklahoma put Hammerstein on the map too, putting his struggling days as a lyricist to an end. With Oklahoma's extraordinary success behind them, the two were unsure how to proceed. The story goes, when they expressed their trepidation about launching into another musical, fearing whatever they wrote would be compared to Oklahoma and consequently be panned, Samuel Goldwyn responded, "Shoot yourself." Luckily, his advice was ignored. Not eager to jump into a new musical right away, they took on a Hollywood remake of a popular 1933 movie called State Fair. Harold Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox, asked them to create a score and screenplay for the remake. A fun fact, before it was released, apparently the producer played the score for Kurt Weill and Ira Gershwin. Weill said it was, quote, very weak, and Ira Gershwin said he didn't like it. Despite their thumbs down, it was favorably received by audiences and critics alike. State Fair was indeed compared to Oklahoma, but in a positive light, at least regarding the music. Quote, "It is to movie musicals what Oklahoma is to stage musicals." The movie itself received mixed reviews, but it still left the world with a hit song, It Might As Well Be Spring. During this time, Rodgers and Hammerstein also started a production and publishing company of their own. One of their first production projects was an adaptation of a collection of stories by Catherine Anderson Forbes called Mama's Bank Account, about the life of a large Norwegian family living in San Francisco at the turn of the century. It was ultimately titled I Remember Mama and was so successful that after its long run, it became a motion picture and later a television series. With these two non-Broadway projects completed, finally, a new and daring idea for a musical was proposed by Teresa Helburn and Lawrence Langner of the Theatre Guild. It was Ferenc Molnar's Lilium, written in 1909. The Theatre Guild had successfully produced it in 1921 and revived it in 1940 with Burgess Meredith and Ingrid Bergman. It was a decided hit, which both Rodgers and Hammerstein had seen. It was a dark play set in pre-World War I Hungary about a fraught and ill-fated love. Initially, Rodgers and Hammerstein flat out refused the proposal due to it being set in Hungary. Helburn countered their response by suggesting it be set in America, perhaps New Orleans. Hammerstein took the time to look into the idea of using a Creole dialect, but again turned it down. Despite their rejection of the idea, Rodgers and Hammerstein kept coming back to it because it was as far removed from Oklahoma's wholesome love story as a story could be. It was a love story to be sure, but an ill-fated one that included theft, domestic violence, suicide, and a supernatural return from the dead. Not exactly standard Broadway musical fare. Once they made the leap of faith and committed to writing a musical based on Lilium, Hammerstein asked Rodgers to let him write the book and lyrics first. For those of you who do not know, musicals always have a score and a book, the latter of which contains all the dialogue and song text. Believe it or not, it was common for music theater composers to write the songs first, leaving the lyricists to fit the lyrics into their music later. Not ideal, but it was the way it was often done. Reversing the order of creating the text and music proved very successful in their collaboration. They reworked the story considerably in order to appeal to American audiences. Rodgers and Hammerstein chose to set the story in a rural seaside town in Maine rather than Budapest, Hungary. They brought more levity to the story, yet ingeniously retained the painful essence of the play and bleak reality of the ill-fated lovers. Very different from the original play is the element of redemption in Carousel. In Molnar's play, the main character, Lilium, never evolves. He essentially is doomed for eternity. In Rodgers and Hammerstein's musical, spoiler alert, Lilium, whom Hammerstein changed to Billy Bigelow, is given a third chance with his daughter and finally declares to Julie, his abused wife, that he loved her, proving his redeemable worth. I would like to take a moment to talk about the name Lilium from the original play. Interestingly, this name means one who wears a lily. As I'm sure you know, the lily can symbolize many things, and it is traditionally associated with both weddings and funerals. More importantly, though, the word lily comes from the Latin word lilium, which derives from the Greek word leirion, meaning true. To me, this is the essence of what the character Lilium is fighting for. Truth, his own truth, and his fight for freedom and independence, no matter what. Julie, the good girl Billy eventually marries, has her flaws as well, but ultimately she too is simply striving for her truth, freedom, and independence, and in the process makes seemingly reckless life decisions. Despite being hit and verbally abused by her eventual husband, Billy, she stands by her man. It is disturbing to witness, but as we all know, not uncommon in domestic abuse situations because the circumstances are always complex. Carousel includes the other general characters in the play, but with different names. There is the happy couple, Carrie Pepperidge and her eventual husband, Mr. Enoch Snow. Nettie Fowler is Julie's cousin and owner of the town's seaside establishment. She is the closest thing Julie has to a mother when Julie is faced with Billy's death. There is Mrs. Mullins, the amusement ride owner who is clearly in love with Billy, despite firing him, and Jigger, the ne'er-do-well influence on Billy who ultimately leads him down his path of destruction. There are also Billy's heavenly friends, and lastly, the Star Keeper, who gives Billy the opportunity to return to Earth to make amends. As with most Broadway shows in the early days, Carousel had its tryout performances in New Haven and Boston, and ultimately premiered on Broadway at the Majestic Theatre, April 19, 1945. Our Boston Lyric Opera production has the distinction of having its piano dress performance in the Colonial Theatre, the very theatre in which it performed 80 years ago, almost to the date, before moving on to New York. Clearly, the Carousel star keeper made sure the stars were aligned for this production. Carousel became an overnight success in New York and ran for 890 performances. Once it left Broadway, it went on a 2-year national tour and was subsequently performed all over the world in countless productions. It won the New York Drama Critics Circle Award as Best Musical in 1945. In 1955, it premiered in London's Theatre Royal Drury Lane and enjoyed 566 performances. In 1956, it was made into a movie and starred Gordon MacRae as Billy and Shirley Jones as Julie. To this day, despite its difficult subject matter and often sexist leanings, it somehow still rings true when thoughtfully directed. Our Carousel director is Anne Bogart, whose directorial brilliance knows how to shine a relevant light on any production she directs. She recognizes that Carousel is a beloved and extraordinarily powerful piece in the American theater canon. In our company, Meet and Greet, she admitted that the work has sensitive issues that need keen discernment and awakeness in order for the cast and audience to connect to its intrinsic power. The story will not be set in Maine, but rather will be a play within a play in an abandoned amusement park, complete with a roller coaster rather than a carousel, perhaps an even more powerful metaphor for life. The time setting is the present. The famous opening pantomime and ballet will introduce a group of travelers who are perhaps refugees who have come to Boston to perform a play in order to form a connection with Boston and possibly a sense of acceptance and belonging. They are emotionally wounded actors who are essentially walking through their trauma into the future, each with a secret looking for a way out of their pain through the characters they play. I can assure you that Anne Bogart's impeccable insight into each character and the story as a whole will retain the essence of the Carousel story, but will also take you beyond the original story. You will be swept up, spun around, and drawn into the drama figuratively and literally. Before I talk about the music, I would like to mention that the original book and lyrics were intentionally written in a small-town Maine accent. Rodgers and Hammerstein felt very strongly that this accent be used. Despite their wishes, this production, like many recent revivals and productions, will not use a Maine accent. 1, because it is not set in Maine, and 2, using accents in productions can become a distraction from, rather than an embellishment to, the emotional or dramatic moment at hand. In the time that I have left, I would like to point out some of Richard Rodgers' brilliance as a composer. The score is full of catchy melodies that makes us smile, ponder, and cry, as we would expect. What is most brilliant, however, are the countless juxtapositions of text and music through the musical that cast a heart-tugging light on the moment at hand. I will point out a few, but listen and look for them yourself as you take your journey through Carousel. This powerful and unforgettable journey, called Carousel, starts with the extraordinary waltz overture, which accompanies an introduction pantomime and ballet. In the original production, the pantomime was staged by Ruben Mamoulian and choreographed by Agnes Nemil. Our production will be staged by the inspired Shura Baryshnikov. It was a bold and brilliant way to open a musical at the time. Overtures to music theater works traditionally included themes from various numbers within the piece, creating a sort of medley or pastiche of the entire show. Not so in Carousel. When you listen to it, you will hear that not one of the Carousel show tunes is included in this overture, except the overture waltz itself, which returns within the show. The overture is one huge variation on essentially 3 themes, which vacillate between the waltz theme and 2 other theme fragments, ultimately ending in a wild climactic end. The waltz overture begins in 3/4 time, of course, but with no sense of the waltz proper for the first 50 bars. I will not play a recording for you, but will instead play the 3 themes so you can listen for them throughout the overture. So first, I'm going to play you the theme of the waltz, which many of you know, of course, but I'll play it anyway, so then you can understand some of the fragments that he starts out with before you hear the full waltz theme. the waltz theme. So what we hear in the very beginning is this. Just a little hint of that theme. And then we get teased even more a few bars later, and we hear this. And then this. And what note is that? The note that the theme starts on. So little teases. So that is the 50 bars leading up to the actual waltz that we hear. Then throughout the waltz overture, there will be two other themes that return and are developed. And they are, one as I call it, the rhythmic raucous theme. You hear that rhythmic motive over and over again. And then we also hear this. So when you listen to this overture, listen for those themes, how they weave in and out of each other and play to a final climax that is incredibly exciting. As with any good overture, it sets the tone for what's to come, leaving the listener both excited and perhaps a little trepidatious, sensing the 2 hours ahead might not be your average ride on the carousel of life, or in our case, the roller coaster of life. There are 4 songs or scenes I would like to share with you. The first scene features a duet and song between Carrie and Julie. Carrie is pumping Julie for information on how she feels about the amusement park barker who put her on the ride. Julie is not forthcoming, and Carrie's response is, "You're a queer one, Julie Jordan." She continues with, "You're acting most peculiar. Every morning you're awake ahead of me, always sitting by the window." Julie's response is, "I like to watch the river meet the sea." And right away, we get a sense that Julie has poetry in her soul and walks to her own drumbeat. She's a dreamer and senses there is life beyond the mill. We also learn in this duet that Julie is more educated than Carrie when she corrects Carrie's reference to an old Sahara sphinx instead of sphinx, which Julie corrects. This scene includes the first example of word painting that Rodgers incorporates throughout the score when Carrie references working in the mill. So let me read you the text first. When we work at the mill, weaving at the loom, you gaze absent-minded at the roof, and half the time your shuttle gets twisted in the threads till you can't tell the warp from the woof. So here we really hear the machines moving. When we work at the mill, weaving at the loom, you gaze absent-minded at the roof, and half the time your shuttle gets twisted in the threads till you can't tell the warp from the woof. It's just wonderful. You feel those, you hear those machines, and then when she has a negative statement about her shuttle all getting tied in harmonically, it really shifts to this quite dissonant. It's a wonderful little moment. The following scene is the duet "If I Loved You" between Julie Jordan and Billy Bigelow. They banter back and forth and cautiously pace around each other. This scene is referred to as the bench scene and is one of the most famous and beloved scenes in Broadway. At the outset, Billy, a clear outsider, begins with Carrie's line, "You're a queer one, Julie Jordan." Again, in this duet, we hear more word painting, one example being when Julie points out that the cherry blossoms are falling. Listen to this, just a little fragment. So as soon as she says, "I can smell them, can you?" The blossoms. And she says, "The wind brings them down." And this is the music we hear. She says, "I can smell them. Can you?" The blossoms. And then we hear this music. And she says, "The wind brings them down." And those are the blossoms coming down. Billy's response to Julie's mention of the blossom reveals Billy's own sense of poetry, despite his gruff exterior. He sings, "You can't hear a sound, not the turn of a leaf, nor the fall of a wave hitting the sand. The tide's creeping up on the beach like a thief, afraid to be caught stealing the land. On a night like this, I start to wonder what life is all about. And he continues with more poetic references to the stars and how small they are in the scheme of things. This is a crucial moment when Rodgers and Hammerstein wisely provide a window for us to see another side of Billy Bigelow, one of poetry and contemplation. After all, we have to understand what it is that draws Julie to Billy and why she stands by him, despite the domestic abuse that ultimately happens. At this point, it is his poetry and sense of self and need for independence that attracts Julie. Julie is the first one to sing If I Loved You. However, when Billy reciprocally sings If I Loved You, we see him ultimately shift to a negative outcome, pointing out his shortcomings and that she would leave him. He sings, quote, "Soon you'd leave me, off you would go in the mist of day." We all know that phrase. There is a final reference to the cherry blossoms with an observation that despite no wind, they are coming down anyway, perhaps a foreshadowing of the doomed nature of their relationship. The interweaving of Hammerstein's dialogue and song text with Rodgers' music is truly inspired and lays the foundation for the rest of the musical. June is Bustin' Out All Over follows the bench scene. It shows us the community coming together over the arrival of spring. One example of Rodgers and Hammerstein's brilliant juxtapositions is the dialogue immediately after this exuberant number when Julie reveals to Carrie that Billy hit her. It is an abrupt and sober revelation that Julie's marriage is not a happy one like her friend Carrie's. Meanwhile, Billy, ever off doing his own thing, has been offered a chance to partake in a robbery by his ne'er-do-well acquaintance, Jigger. Billy has the sense to turn him down when he is asked to bring a knife. Shortly after his conversation with Jigger, Julie finds Billy and tells him she is expecting. Act 1 ends with Billy's soliloquy, his response to the notion of becoming a father. It is a tour de force number. In case you have never seen this scene, I will not spoil it for you. Suffice it to say, by the end of his soliloquy, he has a new purpose in life and he needs money to see it through, which leads him to reconsider Jigger's proposition to abet in his robbery scheme. The top of Act 2 is yet another example of a powerful juxtaposition in this musical. The robbery and the community clam bake are juxtaposed, which comes to a tragic end with Billy taking his life. The last song I will talk about is You'll Never Walk Alone, sung by Nettie as Julie mourns Billy. This song resonated with the 1945 audiences more than any other in the show. World War II may have come to an end a month after Carousel opened, but the pain and suffering of those returning from war and those left at home with no one to greet was raw. You'll Never Walk Alone became a balm for the soul of America and eventually the world. Countless artists have recorded it over the years, including Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, Barbra Streisand, Lana Del Rey, the UK band, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and even Pink Floyd. The song became maudlin for some, but every few years it rises like a phoenix in times of trouble and grief. It has been used as a weapon of protest by the English National Opera Chorus and their supporters against the Arts Council of England's National Portfolio Funding Plan, and closer to home, during the darkest days of the COVID pandemic, once again, it became a balm for a frightened and mourning nation. You'll Never Walk Alone is the quintessential keep calm and carry on song, and I dare say will remain so for generations to come. In closing, I think Lionel Mordecai Trilling, the American literary critic and essayist, captured the reason for Rodgers and Hammerstein's success with Carousel over the years. Quote, "Few men have given so much pleasure to so many people," end quote. The truth and grit in the story of Carousel continues to resonate in all of us. We all just want to be heard and have our place in society, but not at the cost of our freedom and independence. And in the end, our greatest gift in life is to love and be loved. That is the timeless story of Carousel.